Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, all you citizens of the world, to Live from the Heartland for the week of April 6th. It gives me a lot of pleasure to bring on our next guest. He was an original member of the Live from the Heartland team when we did the show from the stage at the storied Heartland Cafe. He went on to write a book after he got his PhD about tuberculosis. And he is one guy who knows an awful lot these days about Detroit, about green infrastructure, restorative justice, substance use and abuse, urban neighborhoods. He spends a lot of time in alleys by his own account. And one and only Paul Draus. Good afternoon to you, Paul.
Hey, Mike. Great to see you.
Been a while. I haven't seen you since we were up there in Detroit following my kid's band, Twin Peaks, around years back.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think I did the show one time down at Loyola.
Downtown, yeah. Well,
Downtown,
you can be a host and you can come on the show anytime you want.
All right. I'll think about that.
A reason I originally contacted you most recently was because there was a lot of talk about the Palestinian vote in Detroit during the Democratic primary, and people really PO'd about Biden's initial stance with Israel attacking Gaza over and over. So I want to get your take on the Palestinian vote, but also just Michigan. What's happening politically? You know, you've got a couple of Democratic senators, got a Democratic governor. They still say it's a battleground state. I would hope not. You've got the UAW up there doing a lot of good work. Talk to us, Paul.
So, yeah, I mean, Michigan, there's a lot going on. It's a mixed bag. You know, they sometimes say that there's Southeast Michigan and the rest is Mississippi.
We got that in Illinois too.
Yeah, but it's not quite that stark. But the issue around, I live in Dearborn, right? I live in Dearborn, Michigan, which is sort of like the home and the heart of Arab America. And so we have about half our population, or a little more than half. I guess it depends on, on which count, you look at, is Middle Eastern or Middle Eastern descent, right? Most of them are Muslim. Not all the Arab Americans or Middle Eastern people here are Muslim. We have a fair number of Christian, Catholic, Middle Eastern people, and so on. But it's definitely a center of culture and communities from that region. There's a lot of different reasons for why Dearborn is the center of kind of Arab American and Muslim life here. A lot of it has to do with Henry Ford, who, brought all these workers to Dearborn when he moved the plant from, Detroit and Highland Park out to Dearborn, which was like farmland at that time, or just a small town and a lot of farmland. But a lot of those groups followed him out here, and then they, communities built up around these original sort of worker communities. But as a result of that, most of those original groups were from what's now Lebanon. It was called Syria at the time, I think, in the 19th century. But over the years, it's become a destination point for lots of people coming from the Arab-speaking world. And so that's included Iraqis, Palestinians, other groups. Yemeni, we have a large Yemeni population as well. It's probably the second biggest after the Lebanese population is the Yemeni population. And then we have a bunch of other groups, and Palestinians are amongst them. Now, I mean, with Palestinians, though, I mean, there are a lot of Palestinians living in Jordan and Lebanon also. So you have people that are Palestinian origin that may have migrated here from Lebanon or from Jordan, right? And so even for the people here that are not themselves Palestinian, I think what's going on in Gaza has been, very traumatic, because just the intensity of this onslaught, starting shortly after October 7th. And so I think the political result of that has been, a measurable, dip in the support for the Democratic Party and Joe Biden in particular. I think Michigan is still kind of a toss-up. if you go look at the statewide polls, and we have a strong Democratic governor. We actually have two houses that are both run majority Democratic at this point. The Senate and the House, which is for the first time in decades that's been the case. And so it's kind of a paradox, I guess, that the state is sort of strongly Democratic at one level, but another level, it's basically a coin flip as far as the presidential race goes. And a lot of that does have to do with Southeast Michigan, and probably that because the Muslim American, Arab American vote is a concentrated voting block here. They do have the capacity to tip an election on the margins, but a lot of it is also some issues with President Biden too, in terms of age and so on.
I
Yeah.
think that I'd like to believe that people will come around and see that the danger of not having the Democrats win this time. We'll see. And I just wanted to throw in there that I think Cook County has the largest concentration of Palestinians in the whole country.
Yeah, they may. I mean, Palestinians are not like a huge group here, but they're definitely Palestinians here. I'm not sure how big a group is. My son grew up here, so he has very good friends who are Palestinian, Yemeni, Lebanese, sort of, the whole range. Um, I think people will come around. I think they'll be more likely to come around if Biden comes around. And
We're open. We're working on it.
and I, and so I see, we're seeing the signs of that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, some people are not coming back. They're not going to vote for Trump, but they're not going to come back
Right.
to Biden. But I mean, Biden's got a lot to worry about as far as losing other votes if he caters to one vote. I mean, that's the problem with the Democratic Party, right? So, but I mean, I
Well,
think the fact that there's increasing pressure, the U.S. finally did not veto a ceasefire resolution at the UN, which is a significant thing if you follow that.
yeah, no, it was great.
It doesn't mean much yet, but I mean that. And then today I heard that there's huge protests against Netanyahu in Israel.
There are, and also the Pope came out for ceasefire, and Netanyahu also banned Al Jazeera. We talked about that at the opening. Um,
Okay.
and one of the things that we've had here in Chicago and Chicagoland is
Uh-huh.
ongoing demonstrations on pro-Palestinian, ceasefire, all that. And they've been everywhere. They've been in city councils. They've followed Jan Schakowsky, our congresswoman, who's gotten to be pretty good on the issue.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of activity by pro-Palestinian groups going on around here.
Yeah. I mean, we have them too, obviously, because we have a big population here. But and the University of Michigan has been a big target as well. And so our president at the University of Michigan, because I work for the University of Michigan, of course, recently he got very upset because there was a disruption at an honors convocation, and he wanted to issue a new policy. So he's trying to get faculty to approve this policy. I don't know how likely that's going to be, because I think faculty like myself feel like, nobody, if it's your kid, it's their honors graduation or whatever, you probably don't like to be disrupted. But on the other hand, if people sit and protest, quietly outside in a corner, that doesn't always get the attention or the results that you want to have. So, I mean, protesters are going to disrupt when there's something they really care about. I mean, I think the university there are issues around how far you go in terms of support for Palestine, because of course it's a politically charged issue all the way down. And, some of the left responses, I think, have been a little bit light on thinking about October 7th. I mean, in my view, like, treating it as basically a straightforward outcome of the occupation, which in my view, there's no doubt that it's an outcome of the occupation, but I don't think you can dismiss the decisions that were made by the folks that engaged in that across the border attack on civilians and young people and so on. So that is tricky. It's a tricky issue for academics, for teachers, for everybody. But I mean, I mean, we do need to confront the situation, and so
I
it's
know it's
taken too
corrupt.
long. It's taken way too long, and hopefully there's going to be movement on it soon. That's what I'm going to say.
Well, we'll be on top of this one weekly probably for a while.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a little bit about you recently took off and you had a Fulbright scholarship. Uh,
hmm
Tell us about getting a Fulbright and where it took you.
So I got a Fulbright Scholar Award to go spend 4 months in Lithuania, which is a small country in Eastern Europe, one of the Baltic states. Formerly a part of the Soviet Union, actually. And so I've been going to Lithuania off and on for the past like 10 years. I went there the first time is almost like a fluke that I got invited to go speak there because I had a colleague that was Lithuanian and she passed my name on to somebody at a university there. And that's kind of how it started. But then I ended up going back a few times and meeting more people each time I went. So I got really interested in some of the things that are going on around sort of urban regeneration and some of these local fights over urban redevelopment, things that you would recognize from places like Detroit or Chicago. And I got to know some of the groups that were involved in really creative types of protest and resistance, but also urban redevelopment visioning types of efforts. So I was able to go over there and spend basically 4 months kind of hanging around with them. And I was participating in this opera that they created about the history of their neighborhood. They created this community opera that was pretty cool.
Were you
And
singing?
I was like singing in the chorus, uh, but they just handed me like a sheet of lyrics in Lithuanian, and I was, I didn't know what I was saying. I mean, it did help me to learn a little bit more Lithuanian, and they'd say, yeah, if you're going to come and hang out here, then, you need to participate. So they had me singing in the chorus and stuff like that. So that was pretty fun. And they feed you really well. When they do social stuff, they always eat and they have a good time. It's a really great group of people. And then I spent 2 months in Poland teaching a class in Poland. So this was actually, this was in last year, the first 6 months of last year. So the invasion of Ukraine still was fairly recent, and that was kind of the big, overshadowing issue in both those places because the Lithuanians, for them this is not an abstract fear, of Russian invasion.
No, for real.
And I mean, going back to the Israel Palestine issue, that this is one of my other. I'm not pro-war, as you know, but I have been in favor of the support of the Ukrainians in their
Me
resistance
too.
to the Russian army, and I feel like that. Unfortunately, the one is getting counterposed to the other sometimes. That you support Ukraine, but you don't support Palestine, and I feel like they're both, in a sense, they should be lined up as opposed to opposed struggles. Um,
Right.
But when I was over there, I mean, I really got an appreciation for, that history. But also, there are people that weren't gonna like live their lives in fear either, so they're basically pretty resolved to, if if Putin comes or if the Russians come, then we're gonna fight, like just like the Ukrainians are fighting, and we're gonna support the Ukrainians, and we hope you Americans don't get weak knees, basically.
Hey, Paul Draus, let me ask you a little bit about you just were named, you had to some position from the University of Michigan at Dearborn to the city of Detroit. What is that all about?
So while I was in Lithuania, I was actually approached by someone at the University of Michigan, electronically, of course, and they invited me to apply to be the faculty director at the University of Michigan Detroit Center, which is uh, a sort of a workshop event space that the University of Michigan has downtown Detroit or midtown Detroit, actually on Woodward Avenue, right across the street from where we were the last time when we met up. I think at the Majestic Bar or one of those places. And so the space has been there, almost 20 years, almost about the same amount of time that I've been here in Michigan. And it took me by surprise, but they asked me if I was interested, and I was like, well, yeah, sure, of course, So I kind of gave them my materials, and then they ended up naming me faculty director. So I started in the end of June when I got back, and it's been a lot of fun. I get to do like a lot of events, a lot of like community engagement, a lot of networking. it gives me a reason to just like, it's sort of like being the producer of the Heartland. It gives me just an excuse to call people on the phone or send people an email saying, "Hey, I heard you're doing something pretty cool. Would you want to come down here and talk about it here?" You know, like that kind of thing. In a way, you prepared me for this role.
Well, if you had know any people that would be good on the show, keep sending them my way. Let me
Okay.
ask you. Let me ask you a little bit. In some of the promo I read about you, it says lately I have been spending a lot of time in alleys. What's that about? I mean, I've always been running through alleys. Love alleys and stuff.
Yeah, so alleys, as Nelson Algren once said, you have to love a city not for its show, its ballets and its theaters, but for its alleys too, right? And so I met a guy here because I go to a lot of different community meetings. I meet interesting people. I met this young guy who was doing this alley activation work, and he started in his own communities. Basically, the alleys here in Detroit is different than Chicago. I mean, they're like little jungles. A lot of them are sort of like they've been neglected so long, they're overgrown. There's foliage in there. There's people have dumped stuff in there. And so it's been like this sort of like terra incognita for a while. But some different communities, people have started kind of taking the alleys back and doing these really interesting, they've got all these ideas about how they want to revitalize these alleys. So I got involved with some of these communities doing this work, and it's just led like one thing has led to another thing. So now we're doing we call urban acupuncture in alleys, right? Which is sort of this hyper local urban revitalization approach to kind of doing really really small pinpricks of change in different communities that help sort of ripple out into the broader environment. And that's been really fun because it's got me involved with a lot of these local groups that are kind of off the grid but doing really really great stuff. And Detroit is full of people like that. I mean, just like Chicago, like you could walk, go through any neighborhood and there are people you would never know about, right? But they're out there doing this work like day in and day out, trying to, recover their neighborhoods. And following the alleys just led me, into all these other things too. So
Well, one of the other things I've noticed from on social media is that you've been doing a lot of sketches and artwork. Is that a therapy thing? Is that something you always did? Is that new? Tell me
uh,
about your artwork.
I always drew when I was a kid. I used to draw all the time, and then even in college, I was an art minor actually as an undergraduate. But then as I got further on, like in my career, I kind of got away from it. I would still draw like on occasion, or I have a notebook. I keep a journal and sometimes sketch in there. But then at some point, I think it was either right before the pandemic or it definitely in the pandemic, it became like a ritual thing. Like I guess it was therapeutic. Like every night I would try and do like a new drawing or a new sketch. So and then I started putting them on Instagram and on Facebook because I would do them in the iPad. Sometimes I do them in a sketch pad and I take a photo, but a lot of times I just do them on the iPad and then I just share them. And it became just a way, for me to like process things I was seeing, or if I saw something interesting that day, or like an interesting character or scene or whatever. A lot of them are plants and like weeds. Like I got really into weeds for a while. I was drawing all these pictures of weeds, and a lot of them were alley based things and stuff like that. So I think it's going to lead, to me, I'm thinking about doing more sort of like writing, drawing style publication, like publications that incorporate. In fact, I have a book that's supposed to come out hopefully next year, which uses my drawings in the book. So I'll definitely keep you posted.
What's the book on?
It's all about this guy that I know here in Detroit who's a metal artist who grew up in Germany. His father was a black GI and his mother was a German woman. He was born in Germany and then moved to Detroit in the 80s, and he'd stayed here ever since. And he makes these windmills out of metal. He's a fine metal, craftsman, but then he started doing these other projects during the Great Recession, these sort of upcycling metal projects, building windmills out of like using satellite dishes for the windmill blades and all this kind of stuff. And so I
Well,
got to know him. And then just started. I did a few projects with him in his life. He's just such an interesting, fascinating character. I just kind of started writing this book manuscript with him,
well, we're going to look forward to the book, and we're going to look forward to you coming back on the show, and hopefully, I get to see you in the flesh, so to speak, sooner or later. Paul Draus, it's
absolutely.
been great having you on the show, and uh, everybody else, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. We'll be right back with more live from the Heartland.
Can I say it? Over and out.
Well, but you're the first guest, so
Okay.
it's
Well,
good
I'm
to
over
have
and
you.
out. Okay.
Over and out for this segment.
All right.